Welcome to the nWay Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of nWay's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by our partners at GameSight. GameSight provides full-service campaign management, taking charge of consulting, influencer discovery, relationship management, billing, and reporting, leaving you free to focus on your core business. With their measurement platform and creator-focused programs, GameSight helps brands grow, increase revenue, and ensure player satisfaction worldwide. And since the company draws from almost a decade of battle-tested experience, including with notable customers like Bungie, Capcom, Ubisoft, and hundreds more, GameSight's attribution platform meets the unique needs of PC, console, and Web3 games. Notably, GameSight brings display, social, influencer, and affiliate marketing into one dashboard for easy comparison. Marketing attribution for PC and console games is complicated, but whether your game is free to play, premium, or supported by DLCs, GameSight has you covered. To learn more about how GameSight has served other games teams and how it can help yours, simply visit gamesight.io or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another nWay Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and with me, I have great panelists as always. We've got Manyu, Maria, and Sebastian. How's everyone doing? I hear Sebastian may have run into some funding, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the great segue, Devin. Yeah. No, so Infinite Canvas, the user-generated gaming meets Gen AI studio publisher I run, raised $6 million recently, which has been a ton of fun. And so we've been launching a new game called creaturecraft.gg. If you want to check it out, it's a Discord game powered by AI, which is always a lot of fun to develop against.
Yeah, having tried it myself, it was pretty easy to get going in pretty much any Discord server you have control over. So recommend people check it out, free to check out. So might as well give that a go. We have some great topics today. Yeah, congrats. We have some cool stuff, just good variety of games topics today. We're going to talk about Baldur's Gate with the third game having a pretty insane launch. Dota Arcade actually shutting down. I was referring to the Valve game, Dota 2, I believe in that case. And then some stuff about Rec League, which is a newly announced game that should be pretty interesting to dig into. Playtika and Playstudios with their earnings calls. Fun stuff in there. And then some interesting discussion over AI and microeconomics around YouTube clip and thumbnail making. But first, why don't we dig into that amazing Baldur's Gate 3 launch?
Yeah, I mean, hottest game at the moment, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I just downloaded my copy yesterday. I still haven't gotten to play it, but I know, Maria, you've played it a little bit, right? How did you find it?
I have three different friends groups, so I have 3 games going on.
Okay.
And
cool.
It is hands down one of the best games I've ever played. I play D&D 5e, and so it's just imagine someone went into your brain in your RPG sessions and then put it into a beautifully crafted environment. When they do their magic is like exactly how I had pictured it in my imagination. It's just absolutely fantastic. Yeah, loving it. I think it's spreading like wildfire, because even in D&D groups, we're like, oh, have you played this? No, install it. And everyone is just buying it from word of mouth in my circles.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'm full disclosure, I've actually never played Baldur's Gate and also never, really engaged with the D&D, the tabletop game and that whole experience. But this time, I just had to
download
it and check it out. So hopefully after the pod, I'll get some time to check out the game. But I mean, the launch has just been insanely great for this. So, maybe first going over some of the performance metrics real quick. So this game has been in early access since October 2020, and it's we got to know that it was it sold about like 2.5 million copies. So at like a $60 price, results about in 150 million in revenue already, which really helped carrying that studio to the next point for full launch. In terms of comps, that's about 5x higher than the early access sales for Divinity Original Sin 2, which is Larian Studios' previous game. There's an interesting story around that that I'll come to, like how Larian got the right to build Baldur's Gate later. But yeah, I think overall, just in terms of those early access copies sold, and after launch, they've probably like doubled that by now, if not more. It's probably going to be like the biggest Baldur's Gate launch of all time. In terms of concurrence, I mean, this has been like that, the sexy headline that's kind of been doing the rounds. It hit 800K concurrent players over the weekend, which is just huge. And it's currently sitting at about between something, 600 to 700K, and also like above Apex, PUBG, and GTA 5. So that's crazy. And one interesting stat, it's like a 123 GB download. I literally had to like just clean out my Steam Deck just to download this game. But that 122 GB or 123 GB download, it also created like one of the biggest Steam bandwidth spikes in history, hitting like close to like 150,000 Gbps, whereas like the average is more like in the 25 to 30K range. So generally, like, really, really good. But yeah, I mean, overall, just kind of knowing all those numbers, and it's also like sitting at Steam's number one top grossing spot right now. There was clearly like this massive unmet, audience hunger that this game is now satisfying, and it's just been a great revival of the Baldur's Gate franchise. But more interestingly, like, I guess I wanted to just hit on like Larian Studios itself. I never knew about them until researching this topic. They started off in 1996, and it's founded by this person called Sven Vinke, and it's a Belgian video game developer. And they interestingly started off in casino and educational games, but then moved into RPGs after that. A lot of other people might probably know this, but I only, again, just got to learn during my research. They're best known for their Divinity series, and now, of course, Baldur's Gate 3. But the way that they got the rights is like a slightly interesting story. So they've been wanting to work on the Baldur's Gate IP for quite some time, and then they approached Wizards of the Coast. Some initial discussions happened in 2014, and Wizards of the Coast kind of felt like the studio is too new, too small, too inexperienced to like take on this IP and kind of be trusted with it. And then, Wizards of the Coast turned them down. But then at around that time, Larian was also working on Divinity Original Sin 2. And the pre-release materials of that like really impressed Wizards of the Coast. And then, Wizards of the Coast went back to Larian, and then they said, are you guys still interested in Baldur's Gate 3? And of course they said yes. And I mean, the studio, they were at 140 employees, 140, 150 employees at that point. And given this IP and, what needs to be done to kind of do justice to the game, getting reviews like Maria's right here, they basically had two options. Either they scale up their team and really deliver, or they scale down the game itself. But I mean, scaling down the game is like really that would just not do it justice. And yeah, they scaled up from 140 to 450 over these 6 years of development. Assuming like about 300 employees maybe working on this, that feels like $100 to $200 million development plus marketing budget for this. And like I mentioned at the start, the early access already netted 150 million. So they're doing pretty good with like the PC with the console launch still kind of pending. And yeah, overnight they're the kings of the RPG space now. Although, yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's also less of an action RPG game, and more of like, I don't know exactly how to call it, but let's just call it like the D&D RPG kind of game.
I think it's just called RPG game. To be honest,
yeah, just an RPG game. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Well, within D&D, within D&D, there's technical players who know the rules ins and out, and I think it just shows Larian's quality to execute. I would say it's the best transformation from a tabletop RPG into a playable game, because they really nailed changes from Divinity 2 into Baldur's Gate to be able to translate that technicality of D&D and just make it easy for people who are really specific about how to play with the rules of D&D. It just does it absolutely perfect, and it's just such a joy to experience it.
Yeah, and that's the core audience to like keep happy, right? Like if you just don't deliver on, the way people imagine these things to play out in the tabletop experience, and it doesn't play out that way in like a 3D experience, then yeah, I mean, I don't think it would have been the success that it is today. But yeah, there's some other interesting tidbits, and that should kind of close out the update. But yeah, one interesting thing I noted was, the early access saves were actually not compatible with the full launch version, but I'm not really sure like how much of distress that might have caused to people. It doesn't seem like too much of distress, but still interesting. But I guess the bigger and more interesting thing is that mods also will be available soon in this game. So I'm like really, really curious to see like what people end up kind of building out with that tool set. But yeah, I guess the final question is, and that's what I was thinking about, is Starfield going to be better than this? My guess is yes, I guess, in terms of units sold at least. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I mean, there was so much said. I don't know if I have anything to add, right? Like, I do think it's a great game. Like, it's a fun game. There's a lot of people playing it. Hell yeah. Right. To me, Baldur's Gate 3 is no different than the type of launch we had with Oppenheimer and Barbie, which is high AAA value, large amount that went into it. And you just got to take a deep breath and say, this is awesome. I'm really happy that we saw some success here and that this team hopefully gets to make Baldur's Gate 4, or more likely support Baldur's Gate 3 into infinitum.
Yeah, based on my social circle, not all of my friends want to play Baldur's Gate because of the type of game. All of my friends want to play Starfield. And so I'm going to say Starfield is going to be a bigger success. It's just more of a wider genre. If they hit the quality and it's amazing and not full of bugs when it releases. I'll just add that if.
Yeah. And also like Bethesda is just like
Bethesda kind of game.
Yeah, exactly. So they just kind of know how to kind of create those more quote unquote mass market RPG experiences, I guess. But I mean, yeah, Baldur's Gate is Baldur's Gate, and currently the best Baldur's Gate launch of all time. But yeah, that's about it with Baldur's Gate. Looking forward to kind of playing it tonight, hopefully. And yeah, maybe in the next episode I can report back and tell you what my first D&D world experience is like.
That's actually an interesting question. Like, I wonder how the experience would be, and curious what's going to look like when you play, if you don't have people to play with, right? Like, I would probably never play Baldur's Gate solo, is my current feeling about this. Like, it's very much with different groups of friends. Curious how people, I'm curious what the play experience is like out there, in part because in theory it's a potentially single player game, but in practice it may not be.
I think this was like one of the biggest reasons for me not getting into Baldur's Gate, like when I was maybe still in school. I kind of saw the game, and it just had like this complexity entry barrier that I just wasn't willing to kind of invest in, and that kind of just kept me from playing the game versus playing a Hitman or an Oni at that point in time. So but yeah, I mean, it's also a little bit embarrassing that I haven't played Baldur's Gate at all, and I guess that's why I just want to kind of give it a chance and see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the relation to these tabletop games, right? So you've got like for a good contrast of a tabletop RPG coming over and not doing well, like Cyberpunk, right? That was basically a translation of a tabletop RPG that had been kind of around for a while, and it had been a long time since anything been done with it. They tried to like shoot for the moon, didn't work out, right? And so obviously this is a situation where I think the D&D audience might be a little bit bigger too. Like D&D is doing very, very well right now, outside of the whole issue they had with the open license that they kind of pacified most of that, I think, at least put out most of the fires around that. And that seemed to calm everyone down. Everyone's just excited about D&D again. Like, I still hear about it. Like, the amount of people that even are asking me if I'm going to play Baldur's Gate. And I'm like, do you even know what that is? Like, you're asking me, like, this has gotten really good word of mouth, it seems like. And that I think that's a pretty big deal, which is funny because it does come across like a single player game in just like what you think of for these kind of games, but it does have co-op. So I think that was a smart choice for pushing that social sort of like, hey, are you going to play it? Can we play it together? Kind of aspect that I think is like very helpful for these sort of things. Like, whereas you can't do that with Cyberpunk, right? I can't co-op with anyone on that. And it's a funny contrast to something like Starfield, because those are pretty different audiences in a lot of ways, but also by the time Starfield really comes out, everyone will be done with Baldur's Gate anyways, because you know how they are with their delays anyways. It'll be timing wise probably be fine. And it'll probably come out buggy enough that some people will wait. And that's just how Bethesda releases are, is you have to expect a certain amount of bugs when they come out. But it's kind of funny, the lineage though, going back to like their Fallout games, which also helped them kind of popularize their RPGs on console and things like that, along with Skyrim. Goes back to like the original Fallout games were also based off tabletop RPGs, but then they didn't get the license they wanted and had to modify it. It was like originally the GURPS license, but then they kind of had to like tweak things because that didn't work out, and there was like potentially some legal issues. But it's just funny, the lineage of these old school tabletop RPG like players bringing that into these games, and now there's enough hardcore audience that are into that sort of thing that it's like very receptive. Because I feel like you go back 10, 20 years, a game like this came out, you wouldn't have been breaking Steam. And so I think that's a pretty big shift in audiences, like we see on mobile, for example, where it like shifts towards more hardcore audiences over time. So I think it's a good sign for hardcore gamers that there is this kind of huge audience for these kind of games. But speaking of complicated games with long lineages and making changes, the Dota story here we've got from Sebastian. This should be pretty interesting to hear.
This is a bonkers story. Highly recommend not listening to me and reading this amazing Reddit thread. And I want to.
Or even watching the video.
The video is crazy, but super long. Yeah. Want to give a quick shout out to Reddit user Trencha, who wrote a great summary. Honestly, you don't have to even watch the video. So here is the story in its entirety. It ends with Dota Arcade getting shut down. So I want to flag that for everyone. Dota Arcade, for those of you who don't know, is effectively the Warcraft 3 map editor, custom game UGC community for Dota. Really robust tooling. We got auto chess, so if you've ever played TFT or DAC, that came out of this ecosystem. And to that extent, a couple of players / industry insiders inside the Dota community, and Sunsfan and Jenkins, created a game called Ability Arena, about 18 months ago. Fun game. By all means, a fun game. Effectively, they went out, they were monetizing it. They put in a few $100,000 into development. They're hoping to get back a few $100,000 out and maybe make some actual money off of it, just like the folks over at TFT and DAC had made previously. They run into this really amazing and amusing idea, which is hey, for balance purposes, they create a community of 250 gamers who are the highest ranked players to come in and talk to them about game design. A player is hey, I've gotten this. Here's my screenshot. The screenshot was malformed. It just wasn't a good way to indicate it. And the moderator was hey, you need to send a new screenshot. And this player, in the infinite wisdom that this person has, starts sending death threats and being hey, screw you. Far worse words were said. To the point which, obviously, the guy was banned for life from the game. He then submits a GDPR request saying, hey, we think you're storing my information. Screw you. This is almost certainly a troll action. It is totally fine that's a troll action. It happens. But it turns out, actually, Dota Arcade's not GDPR compliant. You can't actually delete player data very easily. That's its own set of headaches. But more importantly, because of that, the lawyers got involved. Valve lawyers take a look and they're hey, what do you mean you're monetizing our IP? That is massive trademark and copyright violations. We need to enforce it. Can we work around that? The answer is no. Well, in that case, let's kill Dota Arcade. And that is the story in like 30 seconds or less. It's a crazy story. Highly recommend reading about it. Long story short, they're killing it because a legal team said something needs to change. We can't change it in time. So let's kill the game and go from there.
What's the moral of the story?
Honestly, that's a great question.
GDPR compliant from the start.
No, I think actually, if I had to pull one moral of the story, is people should vote in their elections. Clearly, one person can have outsized effects on the outcome of large corporations and large investments. I think that's probably a fair one, to say the least. So.
Yeah, it just feels weird to me. Like, I think like when I watched the video, maybe they kind of made it sound like Steam had like no idea that that monetization was going on. But I mean, that can't really be the truth, right? Like they just maybe
it could very much be the case. I think it's actually almost certainly the case that there are people like Valve is a large company. Almost certainly the legal team had no idea. Because, we as human beings, if we don't look at, like, for example, Manyu, until you mentioned the $100 million budget for Baldur's Gate, I didn't know it probably spent $100 million. I knew about Baldur's Gate. I'm playing it, but I didn't think about the economics of it. And I think there's a lot to be said about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'm like, that sucks the most for me, at least, is just like how the creativity would just get killed, like just going back to that auto chess example itself. At the end of the day, like a completely new genre was kind of created through that. And just for the the creative betterment and future of the industry, this like really, really sucks. But I mean, who knows? Maybe Steam, also, I mean, Steam probably understands that too, and maybe they kind of clean up their act and maybe relaunch it at some point. Maybe this is just like,
Man, you've never worked with Valve before.
So like once the decision is made, it's made, huh? You don't think it's gonna come back?
They just don't care. I mean, they print money hand over fist. Like Dota has been always, and Counter-Strike are both some of the most hands-off esports ecosystems because they like making games and that's what they do, and everything else is running around.
Well, if you look at Steam charts right now, it's literally Counter-Strike, Dota, Baldur's Gate 3. That's literally the top three like at this moment. So it's kind of funny topic wise that those kind of ended up right there. Because if Dota is not really going anywhere, and they're like, I don't think they're making most of their money off of the mods existing. So I guess who can blame them in a way? Definitely tragic. But I guess the lesson I take away is dealing with mods and monetization is always like a problematic thing, right? Like since Valve started having like workshop stuff and everything, it's always been this weird contentious thing when it comes to monetization. And it is kind of funny because I remember like when Auto Chess was trying to spin off to its own thing, and there was all that like controversy of like, can they launch their own kind of thing? It reminds me of like what happened with like PUBG and DayZ and stuff with Arma, and they're just mods in general, and like not having good setup for how people monetize and how you deal with the legal things like around people modding. It seems like something that needs to be like maybe not solved, but at least like structured with some framework people could just copy and paste into future games. Because I wanted to say it's not going to go away, but I guess it's hopeful that modding never goes away. But it's a pretty big deal, especially now when we start getting into AI stuff and all the things where people can start to make things, or like, Sebastian's project, for example, where there's like, a certain amount of user creation, AI stuff involved. It seems like it's going to be a pretty big topic if people are monetizing, and like Valve's already like kind of gotten into that with AI creations and whether or not they're like allowing stuff, that the whole topic we've been into before with making them prove it. And it seems like Valve is being very cautious from a legal standpoint a lot of times lately when they smell something, like with the crypto stuff where they like tried it, but they're like, legal stuff's not really worth it right now. It seems like that's kind of their stance a lot of times, is like Sebastian said, they're printing money, so why risk it when they could just be like, it's just not worth it to us. And it seems like the way they have their flat structure, if it's not worth it to some random person at the company that's willing to like spend all their time on it, it just doesn't happen. because they have their kind of weird like jump between project structure, which, you know what, to be fair, when you're a company like that makes that kind of money, I guess you can't fault them for it. And it's nice that we have Epic Games as like someone else that could just be like, we'll do it kind of thing. So, you know, maybe we'll see people start to move to some kind of mod environment over there, because I think Epic's probably pretty pro mod. I mean, you look at what they just did with Fortnite. So maybe these kind of people will shift over to that, and they'll find some way to monetize that through, you know, some form or another that Epic is okay with.
Yeah. Couple things to flag that you mentioned, Devin. One, completely agreed. The flag hierarchy stuff is super interesting. There should be an entire episode dedicated towards what Valve was doing. Amusingly, it became very much in vogue in Silicon Valley in the early 2010s, and then died off because there are a lot of inherent problems unless you have a cash printing machine in the background to run the system. The second thing that I will flag for you guys, and I think this is particularly amusing with regards to Valve's lawyers, is I do not fault the lawyers. I think that's something that we often do. In America in particular, you have to protect your trademarks and you have to protect your copyrights. Now, really, if there was enough resourcing to then help people work around those issues, to get comfort to the legal team, I think that's completely reasonable to do. But you're right. There's not enough executive support for it. People aren't going to care. The people move on.
The one interesting point that these what are their names again? Sons Fan and Jenkins, they kind of brought out in their video is they said that the only reason that Valve might kind of decide to, I don't know, at some point reverse the decision is if the community wants it. And I'm curious, like, what do you guys think about that statement? Do you think like, is that in the realm of possibility, and like how has community reaction actually been to this, etc.?
I mean, they certainly have responded to it. It's unclear if this has enough traction for people to respond to. People just don't seem to respond as strongly to stuff like this as they do to stuff in their other ecosystems. And so if I were a betting man, I'd imagine Dota Arcade is dead and they will never make back their money, is sort of my like unfortunate bet here.
I guess just look at the concurrent players from this point forward and see if it still maintains that second place. If it does, then there's no reason for them to care. If it doesn't, then there's a reason for them to care. Like that's kind of the, at the end of the day, I'm sure they have the analytics. Like whether or not they're always paying attention to some of the legal stuff, I'm sure they're paying attention to the numbers. And at the same time, like they've already milked Dota 2 for a long time now. Like I doubt they're going to be like crying if they'll be like, well, we have to move on. I mean, obviously they spent money on it and they built it up, but I've gotten the impression from like, even like just the way they run tournaments and stuff, that they're just like, international's cool. We'll do it as long as it's kind of working. And then as soon as it's not, we'll move on. Speaking of moving on, Playtika, Playstudios earnings, talking about money.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, I'll quickly run through the earnings of both these companies, but I guess the bigger topic I just wanted to kind of hit on, because we hardly talk about it, is what's the state of social casino games in mobile free to play, and this is referring to games like all the slots games and various card games and such like. So for Playstudios specifically, this is a US-based company, mostly having a lot of slots games. Their first half revenue of 2023 was up about like 14% at 158 million. They've mostly broken even over this time with kind of no change due to no change in operating costs. But they continue to kind of bleed cash also over time. And as of the first half of this year, greater than 90% of their quarterly revenue is kind of coming in through all their various slots games. But the interesting twist in the story is that greater than 80% of their downloads actually comes from a Tetris game, the rights to which they acquired from Network at the end of 2021. To me, that kind of feels like one of these. I don't think it's kind of like a diversification strategy from like slots going into casual and kind of the story that Playtika has been telling. My feeling is that this game was it's basically like a feeder DAU feeder game, so that they can kind of continue to find people who would engage with their slots games, which is basically the money printer of the company. But yeah, the one thing I want to call out, and we'll kind of see this also in the Playtika story, is that that Play Studios DAU has just been kind of continuously dropping. And even though Tetris does exist and it's like getting a lot of new people in, at the end of the day, the DAUs for their slots games is the one that kind of matters from a revenue perspective, and that has just been dropping since the start of 2021. Interestingly enough, when during the time of IDFA and the post-COVID slump and such. Playtika, also slightly similar story. Both of them, their Playtika's earnings kind of came out yesterday. Their Q2 revenue, which is at about 650 million, so about like 5-6 times bigger company than Play Studios, that was down 2% quarter over quarter and 2.5 year over year. It's still, Playtika still continues to be a profitable company, and the 10 to 12 net income margin, and cash flow generation is strong. They're currently sitting on about 1 billion in cash. But yeah, like I mentioned about Playtika also in the past, their portfolio continues to be a very, very old one, and their casino theme titles are actually growing in terms of the portfolio revenue mix share. So this kind of flies in the face of the narrative also that they've been trying to drum around about. We are kind of diversifying into casual, and we want to kind of make that the bigger revenue portion of the company. But yeah, again, with Playtika, similar to Play Studios, their DAUs and daily paying users also continue to drop. And this is, if you check out Playtika's earnings, this is probably also why they keep calling out how their direct to consumer platform is performing so much better quarter over quarter, just so that they can kind of signal, I think at least, that they can kind of signal to the market that they are kind of taking control of this IDFA situation and that entire conversation. But yeah, so like just very quickly in summary before talking about like the state of social casino itself, but basically both Play Studios and Playtika, they're both heavily dependent on their slots and social casino games for a good chunk of their revenues. But the DAUs of both these games continue to drop, and therefore revenues will also continue to drop, because how much can one really milk an existing player base with the free to play monetization mechanics. So but yeah, and so kind of zooming out and looking at the state of social casino itself.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Manyu. I had a question about Playtika. Did you notice any change from them releasing their blockchain Reels feature? Because they released it towards the beginning of this year, I think. Was there anything in the earnings about it? Because I've not heard anything since the release went live, and it's still active.
Yeah,
it seems to have very low traction.
Yeah, anything Web3 was just not mentioned at all in their earnings.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah. But yeah, something that I've always kind of felt about like the entire social casino, category / genre on mobile is that it's kind of always, maybe from 2021 onwards, it's always been at this crossroads where it can either kind of choose to slowly fade into the sunset or kind of evolve in some meaningful way. The interesting thing about, if you kind of look at the trailing 12-month downloads for this genre, the downloads are actually up 42% year on year, which at about 1.7 billion. And the reason that's interesting is because I just wouldn't have expected, new players to be coming in to the genre at this point. But on like deeper investigation, I think that's mostly driven by just new games launching and like the same people, mostly the same people, just like playing multiple games, and therefore the download numbers kind of inflating on Data.ai. But I think the core point is that even though like downloads are up 42% year on year, revenue has basically stayed flat for this entire genre year on year. Therefore, it's just it's just not like quality users at the end of the day. None of that download volume or user volume is generating into any kind of money at the end. But yeah, I guess that's kind of like my overall point about social casino. I feel it's really at this like crossroads where it kind of needs to choose to either or not choose, but if it doesn't do anything, it'll just kind of slowly fade into the sunset, or they have to like continue to evolve in some meaningful ways, either through like genre innovation of some sort, or figuring out new UA creative strategies and such. And yeah, I think casual casino, which is games like Coin Master, was like one such evolution. But those are also, I don't think the player overlap with social casino is super high. There is something there, but it's also not like super high. So yeah, something else kind of needs to happen. But yeah, social casino continues to kind of surprise me every year, that it's still kind of around and still chugging to some extent. But yeah, curious to hear what do you guys think?
I seem to remember reading a report a couple months ago that actually said it was back to growth. The genre, am I misremembering?
I don't know. Depends on the report and I guess the data provider itself. I mean, we're with Data.ai, and maybe the growth that they were talking about was the downloads growth, and maybe not revenue. But yeah, revenue doesn't really seem to be going anywhere.
I was wondering about its long-term legs as a genre, because obviously, like the real-world casinos, right, like which are different business, right? They work economically pretty differently, but they've been around for a very long time, and they're not really going anywhere. But I wonder about the genre, like whether it needs to like continue to evolve and tweak and stuff like that. Because when you look at certain genres on mobile, some of them just never go away, like city building kind of stuff, right? Timer sort of thing. That's been around since Facebook. Gaming since really technically before that. If you want to go way back, it could back to like very old DOS games and BBS store games and stuff. And so like some stuff just kind of has that persistence where maybe for some businesses it's not economically viable, where like they're not making the profits, like as you said, downloads going up, revenue not, things like that. So maybe do we end up in a situation where there's just less of the games because it's not like a growth industry, but it's like a consistent one where people are like, hey, I'm not going to get into this business, but the people who like dominate it stay in it. And I mean, to your point about like the growth, I actually have been seeing commercials for games. I don't know if they're new games or not, because I don't play most of these, but I will see them on streaming services like, Hulu or whatever. I'll see the commercials for them still. So there's definitely still advertising going on like outside of just say Facebook ads and things like that. So there's definitely interest, at least in trying to pull in new customers, but I got to imagine it's different to acquire customers for a download of a mobile game versus like a physical casino, right? Like it's a pretty different thing. So, I mean, like, what's your thoughts on like the long-term, say like 5-10 year?
Yeah, like I think the core issue with social casino is it basically like mirrors a lot of mid-core genres in terms of its user acquisition strategy. So like targeted UA is very, very important for social casino, and also retargeting strategies. So basically keeping your existing players activated at all times, and also kind of retargeting all your churn players and bringing them back. So but in the current UA environment, like that entire lever has completely, I mean, at least for iOS, it's been removed to a really good extent. And Android has like its limited amount of high quality players around the world. So I think, and that's why I'm like continuously surprised with like how social casino is able to like sustain and chug over time. But I mean, even Google is eventually moving to, it's going to like end up mirroring Apple's policies when it comes to, this privacy first world. And yeah, then then I think something basically either fundamentally needs to change in their user acquisition strategy itself or the products. And that's basically what's going to either keep it alive, or and maybe hopefully like return it to a path of growth at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big contrast with the privacy stuff versus like regular casinos, for example, which are very big on profiling people, keeping track of them, all that stuff, right? All the stuff that is starting to go away in mobile. And so I wonder then, like, do we see social casino, for example, starting to do lots of incentivizing of like, give us your email address, things like that, so they can pull, as you said, pull the customers back. Like, for example, and I keep using the casino real world one just because it's like one people probably know pretty well in general. They'll do a lot of retargeting with like bringing people back with like free play, right? Where it'll be like free play promotions, other things where they're like, hey, they have your email address, they have your physical address, and they'll try and take advantage of that to try and get you to come in. Obviously, like social casino is already sort of built around an element of free play. But I imagine there's like that same kind of tactic or strategy of like, hey, here's a promotion to get you to come back, get you re-addicted again, stuff like that. And I mean, maybe that's the future, that is just trying to like continue to pull back people. But as you mentioned earlier, it like in something I think I've heard a few times around social casino, it's people bouncing between games a lot. Like they run out of their whatever spins for the day, they just bounce to another one. And so it's like maybe there's even some room for a few players if they can kind of maintain that core of like, oh, everyone's just playing these three, for example. And then just, well, if everyone is, then those three can retain, but maybe not monetize super great. Like, I mean, is there situations like that where we could just see a few little, kingdoms of those games?
Yeah, that might actually maybe that actually ends up happening, and I think that's probably why like social casino will probably never really go away, and it will just kind of sustain at maybe lower levels over time. But on your point about the retargeting stuff, I think that's why just going back to this direct to consumer platform that Playtika is kind of pushing. That's pretty much why I think that they are investing in that tech, and essentially trying to like get to know who's playing their game and who could be playing their game outside of Apple's and Google's ecosystems, and kind of beholden to whatever tools that those two platforms provide. So, and that's why like Playtika is just trying to like take control of that conversation and just get back to fully knowing who is playing and who could be playing their game. I'm not sure if Playstudios is doing anything similar. They have like a Play Awards program, which is some kind of a loyalty program, in collaboration with various casino, like real casino brands and stuff. But I haven't looked into it deep enough to really know if it's kind of something in a similar vein or not.
Do you think there's any indication that we could see, because now that Playtika, like they're not making new games, but they've started acquiring some at least with Yoda. Is there any possibility then, if I'm talking about like consolidating the social casino space, could we see an acquisition strategy where it's like, if it's just going to be down to the few people that already know how to run social casino really well, they see a potential in one, but another company that's just not interested in doing it anymore, scooping that up and just kind of controlling the, like a semi-monopoly around the industry, like if it's just not going to go away?
Yeah, that's what I think that could potentially happen. And for me, like the whole Governor of Poker acquisition, Playtika was, I mean, it came like a couple of weeks before the earnings came out, so it was clearly like a signal to the market that we want to like continue investing in. First of all, like we can continue to do M&A after like the shadow of not being able to get Rovio, but also maybe it was a move in like the semi-monopolizing of the poker subgenre, because with the acquisition of so I mean, Playtika has the biggest poker game right now in the poker subgenre with the World Series of Poker game, and I think Governor of Poker is at position number 3 or 4. So kind of getting Governor of Poker in then takes their market share up from 20% to about like 30-35% in that. And then, once if they consolidate these different poker games, then they can just cross promote and, essentially generate more revenues like that and kind of keep their portfolios going. So it could happen, but I feel it's still like, it'll be like a slow growth strategy. But yeah, that could potentially happen. I mean, the other interesting thing is Playtika is also kind of closing in on sitting on $1 billion in cash, right? And that will need to be deployed at some point, and that's definitely not a small amount of money. So maybe something big coming from Playtika.
Yeah, I would say one thing that I just want to flag as a interesting thing to think about stems from a couple of priors. Just want to cover the priors. One, like social casinos, whether people like them or not, casinos in particular are the best game loops in the world. And from a pure, if you define a game loop as input and output, where I input some action and I output some emotion, there is no loop that is more clean and purely like dopamine driven than casino based loops. In that way, casinos are actually insanely good games. There are a lot of other issues with it. They might be too good of a game. That is something that's come up again and again, but that's always concerning in that way. The social element of casinos, which is interesting, the social casino part of it, some people use it as backhand to mean, hey, you're gambling without actually making any money. But in reality, there should be more social components in terms of trying to interlace your communities in order to drive a lot more traction. The thing that Playtika, at least from what I've been looking at and been following along, is struggling with actually has nothing to do with either of those things. I think they're still quite good at the social part. They're still quite good at the casino part. I think the core question revolves around money. I think it specifically is a question of whether or not you want to burn the furniture or not. There's this old school thing for those of you who don't follow game design as closely, which is that at any moment in time, you can burn the furniture in order to create a bigger fire. But the cost of that is that you burned all your furniture and you've destroyed your house. And one interesting thing that Manyu, I think you're alluding to, which is I think the question is like, hey, do you keep iterating on these dying formats or on this game that no longer has the social pizzazz that were built on LTV CAC curves that are pre-ATT changes? Or do you burn the furniture, make a ton of money, call it a day, let it die, and then work on the next thing? I think that is a fundamental question that is constantly on the minds of everyone involved. You honestly do want to burn the furniture if the game is going to die eventually, because the live op costs of these games are so high. I don't know the answer. I do think to the similar data Maria have seen, I've seen that social casinos as a genre in terms of money generated hasn't decreased at all. In fact, it's only increased. Adjusted to inflation might be flat, but like it's only increased. And really the question is where that's been aggregating. Is it aggregating in the Playtika universe? Absolutely not. There are a lot of ex-Playtika guys and gals who are scattered throughout Turkey and Israel right now, who are killing it, making new games that are capturing and stealing away some of those whales that have different scale. I don't know the solution, but I think this is probably one of the most interesting executive decisions that are going to be made, which is, hey, are they going to start burning the furniture or not? A really good example, a canonical example of burning the furniture is an old Marvel game, which I will not name the name of, where playing Spider-Man, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, Spider-Man is by far the most popular and most famous and most sought-after character in the Marvel universe. And so they didn't let you play Spider-Man. It was a super end goal that you could only achieve by spending thousands of dollars and thousands of hours. They basically unlock Spider-Man. It drives revenues through the freaking roof. And then the game dies. And that's what burning the furniture looks like. Because now they've gotten rid of the incentive, you're good to go. So.
Yeah, I think I do agree with like your overall point that it will be like a pretty interesting executive decision. Though I would challenge the game design point specifically a little bit. So I think I would actually challenge and say that I think hyper casual games are probably the best design loops versus the casino ones, because at the end of the day, the casino loops, money is kind of introduced as an ingredient, and as soon as money is kind of introduced as an ingredient in the design loop, that basically overshadows anything else. If you can kind of make it, if you just make it easy, or you kind of make the path to earning more money or have greater winnings as easy as possible, pretty much any loop would work. But being able to get into, the primal dopamine hitting motivations of human beings, I think actually hyper casual is maybe doing the best.
Manyu, I think you and I are saying the exact same thing, by the way. Like hyper casual loops, with all due respect, to the people who make these hyper casual loops, and I have no disrespect there. I actually think it's really interesting. They are all the same casino loops. There's actually no delta I've seen in any hyper casual loop that's any different from a pure press button get reward mechanism. The only delta being like you replace dollars or something else. I actually think Wooga, which was an acquisition Playtika made about 5 years ago, I want to say, were really good at exactly that obfuscation. Like that basically people thought of Wooga as somehow a deeper game loop in the casual world, but in reality, their hospital game was effectively just a casino style social casino loop, but just dressed up with some interesting lipstick, right? There was like a lipstick pig metaphor I was trying to make, but it's been lost, so I'll leave it at that. But I completely agree. Like it is so interesting to see what these guys and gals are doing, and I think a lot of them you should just kill them, right? If you build your game on a CAC LTV model that's no longer sustainable because the CAC is wrong or the LTV is wrong, that just sounds like you should cut your losses and move on.
I guess the question I have then is, so like, you know, what you're saying is like, okay, well then if it's built around acquiring players and that's not affordable anymore combined with the live ops stuff, then it's just like, all right, well, it's just not worth it anymore. What if you were to take an approach, and then maybe this is a burning the furniture, of just squeezing players more? So you just squeeze out the people that aren't the whales, keep the whales, and be like, that's fine. Like we can survive off the whales. We can reduce the live ops to just what the whales want. We can focus on that. Obviously, you maybe have a little bit lower than just whales. But what I'm saying is, like, if you're just like, hey, we don't care about acquiring new people, we don't care about necessarily like trying to overly run the live ops. We're just going to like kind of almost skeleton crew this, but with enough that the whales are happy, and just roll with that and say, you know, maybe some games don't survive that and some do. Like, is that just like a viable path forward? Just be like, that's good enough.
This is more Manyu's territory, but I want to take a quick stab at it. You really start messing with your PE ratios, because effectively when you have a growth story and you're able to grow your users and your revenue at the same time, the markets may give you credit for a PE ratio of over 10x, 20x even in some of these tech companies. When we're trying to squeeze out marginal dollars on depreciating assets, we've now entered the world of sustainable long-term businesses. And I think that's exactly what we should live in for a lot of these game companies. But we're talking about revenue multiples back down to like 3 to 5x as opposed to 20x profit earnings, right? I will flag that this is what Playtika has been, the headwind they've been running into since they IPO'd, right? Or did they IPO? I actually don't remember if they direct listed or IPO'd or SPAC'd. I forget exactly how they went public. But since then, you know, the stock's been down something like 50, 60%, right? Like it's a pretty crazy amount, in part because there was a belief pre-ATT that we can just keep putting in money and it prints money. Like I put in $1 and it gives me $1.10. That seems great.
Isn't that just tech in general, though, that you're talking about? Like the belief around everything being 20x all the time, and that story kind of starting to come maybe a little less true than people wanted?
Oh, you say that, but Meta's also up 150% year to date. So, like, you know, it's unclear, right? It really is a story of casual gaming, I would say. And I think social casinos have taken the largest brunt of the hit, and we'll see if it recovers. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, on the whale, like sustaining on whales, that's basically like what both Playstudios and Playtika and probably the entirety of social casino is doing right now. But it's, I mean, yeah, it can continue for some time. But at the end of the day, the reality is even whales have, you know, limited amount of money in their wallets, and you just cannot keep squeezing that lemon. It's just not an infinite pool, basically, and therefore, you know, unless you launch new games and, you know, give them new reasons to spend, then yeah, you're basically on a downward path, and you can extend that downward path for a longer period of time. But yeah, from a public company perspective, you know, that growth story does matter, and yeah, you cannot do it on a fixed portfolio with a fixed amount of whales that have a retention curve attached to them, and which will also keep decreasing, you know, over time. So
I guess then I wonder if we'll see basically it moving kind of offshore, right? Where it's, you know, if it's just not the good thing for the tech industry anymore, kind of thing, like especially the Western kind of tech Silicon Valley industry, and they're just like, meh, not interested anymore. We moved on to other things, and maybe that's like a situation where, you know, it moves to Turkey and other places like that where they're maybe more willing to do that because they're not necessarily needing a 20x potentially. I don't know. I think the future sounds pretty uncertain based off everything you guys have said, where it's like maybe some of this will work, maybe it won't. Maybe some of it's worked better than we expected, but maybe some of it hasn't. So I think it'll be a topic I imagine we will revisit, no doubt.
Yeah.
But
I think most of the social casino focused companies are mostly going to just be focused on diversifying outside of the genre, and we kind of see that already kind of happening with huge games. For example, they've kind of moved into setting up these Supercell style pods and really experimenting with the kinds of games that they can build outside of social casino. So social casino continues to pay the bills and slowly build up their cash balance, but yeah, I think everyone is kind of seeing the writing on the wall a little bit and investing in diversifying outside of this genre.
Well, I guess we'll see. Speaking of Recs that could be in slow motion here, we've got Rec League. Could be an interesting one in terms of Web3 potential still.
Yeah, well, that was a great segue. Before we dive in, just to wrap up that Playtika, I had one thought. I feel like for, I don't know, about a year, we've been talking about how social casino portfolios need to diversify, and yet we haven't really seen that in action, at least in Playtika. So at the end of the day, it makes me wonder, like, what's going on? Like, why isn't it moving in that direction faster? So Rec League, nWay was acquired by Animoca. So nWay is the developer of Rec League, and they also developed a mobile game called Power Rangers Legacy. And essentially, Rec League is a gameplay reskin with very small tweaks. It changes how you create your characters, their mechs. You have to collect mech parts, and then each part has an ability. And basically, how you build your mech is what's going to give you the abilities. If you imagine a fighting game, you're mostly moving and then selecting your abilities, so it's not super twitchy as you'd expect, for example, with Marvel Contest of Champions. And this is a game that will be a blockchain game and a non-blockchain game at the same time. And the innovation that they're going for is that within the non-blockchain game in the store, players can buy mechs that were built by blockchain players through IAPs. And so their proposal is that they're going to create a sustainable economy where it is going to have an element of play to earn, but it will depend on the sync for Web 2. So overall, this is one of the key takeaways from my analysis that makes me very bearish on this game. Because looking at nWay's ability to scale user acquisition and the performance of Power Rangers Legacy, I just don't see that they're going to be able to create a non-blockchain player base that is large and engaged enough to create this thing for blockchain players. And so, like, looking at the differences of Rec League and the current incumbents in the mobile genre, so I'm looking at Marvel Contest of Champions, Dragon Ball Legends. I looked at Injustice Gods Among Us, and the performance isn't good, so I'm not really comparing them here for Rec League. And one thing that first strikes me is that Rec League doesn't have an IP. So Marvel, Dragon Ball is all IP driven, but Rec League's not going to have one. Their solution is, like Fortnite or Garena, where they're going to do brand crossovers every season. And so that's going to create your IP driver. But I really don't think that's going to be enough because you don't have the core IP for your user acquisition. And then that's going to put more pressure in your user acquisition strategy and creating these different creatives every time you have a different IP. I just think that that's a really massive hit in terms of the abilities to succeed of this game. And then their first IP is targeted to blockchain players, which is Bored Apes. And so, if you're targeting the small blockchain community, that makes a lot of sense. It's a popular IP. But then if you're making this game for non-blockchain players and you're going to have to scale them to create that thing, Bored Apes is a minor IP. And maybe it's even an IP that will create the wrong impression for non-blockchain players. Additionally, their combat. So I did play Power Rangers Legacy to try it. I'm just quite confused who the target is for that game, because it's not skill twitchy. It's not incredibly lean back. It's sort of in the middle. And then they're adding this whole mech RPG that has a bazillion combinations for you to create it. So it's not really for the casual player when you have all of these combos. So the targeting isn't clear for me. Also, they're not releasing Rec League on iOS. But looking at just Power Rangers Legacy that does not have good performance, but just looking at their game, the revenue per download on iOS is just so much higher than Google Play. And so I can only assume they're not going on iOS because of the blockchain restrictions, potentially. I'm really, really not sure, because Power Rangers Legacy is on iOS. In any case, looking at the performance, I would say Power Rangers Legacy would be a game that would have been sunset by most mobile studios in terms of expected KPIs. And if you compare, Marvel Contest of Champions achieves a peak revenue of like 23 million, 18 million, Dragon Ball as well. And then you look at Power Rangers Legacy is like, 200K a month. It's just really low. And so I'm thinking, like, what is the play here from nWay and Animoca taking this game that has been in the market? It has not scaled. It has poor performance considering benchmark for mobile. Why are they going with this gameplay? And so I just see them targeting blockchain. Like, it's an okay game. It's a good game to play. And they're targeting blockchain players. But it just makes me question, like, I don't see how they're going to scale this in non-blockchain to create that sync. And then also, I'm not even going to go into whether it competes with the other main incumbents like Tekken and whatnot. It's not even worth bringing into the conversation. Yeah. What are your thoughts on my analysis?
I don't know. I think the project is, like, honestly, I think it's going to be DOA, this project. It's like, for me, like, basically what like fighting games come down to is, the characters and the controls, and like they kind of these two elements they kind of enable some of the hallmarks of fighting games, like the speed and the themes and the narratives around the characters, and and most importantly, mastery of these characters, when you're actually when you're actually playing that fighting game. But I feel like over here nWay has just made like some weird decisions. One is it's mech themed, which we all know is really not like the most mass market theming for mobile players. Second, all the mechs kind of look the same. So if you look at like some of the biggest fighting games out there are all these individual characters who have like very, very strong narratives. They're all balanced against each other in terms of the skills that they bring to the table and the fighting style and how players can kind of interact with them. Over here, it like all the mechs kind of look the same, and there are, like you said, these I think they said like 1.7 quadrillion combinations because of all the parts, which basically means that the characters are not really going to be that different from each other in the fighting sequences, and yeah, like from a controls perspective, or from a characters I didn't talk about controls, but like just looking at some of their gameplay videos, it also felt like the control system for this game is kind of like how like turn-based RPGs maybe look like, where you just have like a fixed set of buttons with fixed set of skills that you're doing inside,
and you're still moving.
Yeah, and it but if you kind of compare it to, I do think like Contest of Champions is the better comp, and even Mortal Kombat 10, they have like really while they have like simplified the control scheme to fit mobile, they have still been able to retain the uniqueness of every character, and with different with like different abilities, and like what they can actually do and things like that. But I just didn't really get that feeling from Rec League right now. So
yeah,
I think
I would say it's not a fighting game, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's more of a deck. It's like a deck building, time your usage of your ability and be in the right place, but it's not It's not a skill-based fighting game.
Yeah,
apart from
exactly.
the
I think it's
timing.
more like a fighting RPG play rather than like an action fighting game. And I think just given like how that 1.7 quadrillion number, it gives me the feeling that, I mean, basically it's a game that is still continued to be designed for, speculators first and, fighting players second. But if it is a fighting RPG play, maybe then I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'd say honestly, my analysis, I thought it was going to be deeper, and then I quickly reached the conclusion that this is a game being pitched to blockchain players with an element of non-blockchain to create that economy of sync. But this isn't really a game that's being tailored to scale in the non-blockchain market. If you look at, that's why you have all of these combinations. It's like, oh, so many NFTs, and then you can sync them and you can burn them. You look at fighting games and they're not built through combinations on purpose because you have to really control the experience for the mastery and the combos. And this is, and then the mechs allow you to have these 10 pieces that you built. And I would say like maybe mechs are more targeted to the blockchain community in terms of the interests. Was it My Games released today, or they did a PR push for Little Big Robots, which is like a casual-fied, really vibrant War Robots experience that I started playing today, and I love it. So I can see how mechs could be casual-fied, but that's not what Rec League is.
One of the things that I always want to flag to everyone, especially people who are thinking about games in general, is that we should account for base rates, right? Like most games fail. And by most games, I mean like 99% of games at this point fail. And so it's always interesting to see if a game will succeed more so than to necessarily opine if it'll fail. I think talking about Baldur's Gate and how awesome and successful it is always far more interesting to me than try and figure out, hey, why I think this new launch will fail. Because deep down, at least for me, I always hope that everyone succeeds. Like I think that's one of those things where I'm deeply hopeful. I think the one part of Marie's analysis that really resonates with me, and I think is really applicable, especially in this fighting game genre, is the lack of IP. There is no distribution here. And so it's hard to say that the game mechanics on their own can stand the test of trying to succeed when there is no distribution. One would hope that, say, the Bored Apes or otherwise provide enough distribution such that these games to succeed, but it's still unclear. And I think that is something that we will see come up over and over again. One bad-natured thing that I see a lot in blockchain, and I also see this in some other game formats as well, is you can't use the ecosystem as an excuse to make a bad game. A bad game is a bad game no matter where the bad game is. Like Manyu and Maria's conversation delineates this, where it's like, hey, if these game mechanics, be it the quadrillion whatever, or 10 different actions, don't make for a fun initial 30 seconds, initial 2 minutes, initial 5 minutes, then it's just not a game, right? And so I really hope that they succeed from the perspective of I hope every game creator is able to make an interesting game. But I do think that if you don't have an interesting distribution method, be it Dragon Ball or Pokemon or something that makes someone want to play the game and at least stick for a little bit, and you're a bad game where Manyu's like looking at this and sees no difference in the actions, that's a bad sign for this game, right? It means that they're not doing any of the things. There are necessary and sufficient requirements. It's necessary that you're a good game, but it's not sufficient you're a good game to succeed. But if you're not doing the necessary parts, it's just not going to do well.
The thing that confuses me the most about this case is, I mean, it's being developed by nWay, right? And they have been like making fighting games for the past 10, 15 years. So like I would expect like they kind of know, the important ingredients of a fighting game. But yeah, I mean, just kind of mostly in agreement with what Sebastian is saying.
To jump in as, someone now building a game in blockchain, I would say it makes it hard because you have to really determine what's your key driver, a really, really fun game, and then you create monetization for it, or do you create a game that has a really good economy in terms of things that you can sell and sync, and then you have a game to sustain that. Because everything, in blockchain currently, what a lot of studios are pursuing is using blockchain for monetization. And if you're doing that, it does change how you develop your gameplay. And this is what I see is that even if nWay were excellent, I think you said that they are, even if they're excellent at building a fantastic fighting game where you have one character and they're going to fight, that's not going to create the blockchain economy that you need. And so this is why I see is like Rec League is a game that is built to have a good economy, or like economy with many things that you can buy and sell and equip into your mech. And that's the prioritization here.
It'll be interesting to see how it does. There's as Manu said, nWay actually developed some pretty good fighting games before that were IP based. The Power Rangers game, that not the mobile one you were mentioning, but the previous one that was on console, it was also on cloud. I remember actually playing it on Stadia. Was a pretty solid game, and they were pretty good at developing the net code and doing like an actual good fighting game. But again, that was IP based. They also did a wrestling based one that I think was WWE. That was I imagine did okay. So they know what they're doing in that area, as Manu said, which is why this is odd. But they've like, speaking of odd choices, I mean, they just came off of after the Animoca acquisition, developing a Olympics themed game specifically for the Olympics that had happened, and like that was just the weird, like where is this even being developed by them? It's not in their wheelhouse at all. Like whereas this game at least kind of is, but developing it for mobile is kind of an interesting choice because it's like then they have to skew it towards that style of gameplay, which is really not their forte. And I think actually the closest comparison is Transformers Forged to Fight, which is a very similar style of gameplay. It's robots. The difference is, of course, had IP. Even that didn't succeed. It's to the point now where it basically got rescued by Netflix. So like it was a Kabam game. It just kind of like started going downhill towards the end of 2022, losing people, just couldn't retain them. And now Netflix basically scooped it up and hasn't really been able to rescue it either. And now it's just going to kind of coast off of being part of Netflix's catalog. And so if that one can't even work, where it's a robot IP that has characters that people care about, then yeah, it's probably, this is a Web3 play. And if the Web3 side of it works, where like say the Yuga Lab part takes it off, then yeah, maybe it could succeed off the Web3 part. But as far as the mobile game design part, as far as the fighting game design part, that's probably not their strong suit here. And it is after being bought by Animoca, they've just been making some strange choices. And I don't know, maybe we'll see more as more comes out, because they've released a decent amount of information, but obviously the game's not out yet. But it is a lot of odd choices. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, I just wanted to, before we move on to the topic, I wanted to talk about Riot's Project L, because I dove into a rabbit hole about fighting games, and then I appeared on the other side. And honestly, I'm now even more excited for what Riot is building with Project L, like putting these two experiences side by side and seeing what is required to make a grassroots esports level fighting game. The number of features that are necessary for like practicing, perfecting, the depth of mastery of each character, seeing what Riot has done with, League of Legends and Valorant. They really have my betting chips now for being able to make a next generation fighting game. And they're making like a tag team based fighting in multiplayer, where it's like wrestling tag team, where you're in together and then you wait for your partner to hopefully survive and then tag you in and have that whole mechanic. The art style looks amazing. And so I'm actually really excited. And I think out of everyone who could try to challenge the incumbents, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, I believe that Project L has a good chance. Do you think I'm being too happy and excited about this? Should I be more bearish?
I've not looked into Project L like very, very deeply, but based on whatever gameplay videos I saw and like some of their developer vlogs and such, I think I would like share the excitement for sure. And I think they even said in one of the developer vlogs that if while they were making the decision to kind of enter the space, one thing that they definitely wanted to get right with that game is they wanted to introduce something new to the genre with that game. And that's essentially this tag team feature, and how that feature specifically is going to change up fighting styles in a like the typical fighting style of mastering one character and then playing that character in a fighting game versus maybe either mastering multiple characters and being able to play with them and synergize with them in a round, or being able to play with a friend of yours in such perfect coordination in the round so that you can beat like 2 other people. And yeah, I don't know, it could be big, or it could just not work also. But yeah, I think that's I guess those are the kinds of bets that also kind of evolve genres and don't. So yeah,
my understanding is previously there was a game, I can't remember the exact name of it, I was trying to look it up, by a couple of developers that was in I think an alpha state, that was like really good. Like they spent a long time making really solid net code. Anyone who plays fighting games knows, like online knows, the net code is like really, really important to these types of things, especially if they're looking to be esports competitive. And it was a really solid game. I actually played it during like that short alpha they had, and then they got scooped up by Riot. And so my understanding is, I believe those people, unless they've moved on, are on this project, and so that it that gives it some good potential, at least from the development side, from the like having people that understand fighting games really well. Now, of course, like once absorbed by Riot, who knows after that point, right? But I do think that gives it at least a good indicator that like there's some potential in that side of things. Obviously, Riot has been pretty successful so far in their spinoffs that they've done, like in their other projects. I mean, I guess technically not spinoffs, but other projects they've done outside of maybe like Legends of Runeterra, where it's been like a little bit less successful, I think, than they probably wanted. But Valorant seems to have done well. So I think it's probably easy to just be bullish on this because it's Riot. They've been doing well. They've got good people. They've spent a while on this. I don't think there's any reason to like doubt that it could at least have potential, other than the fact that they're going into a pretty heavy fighting game season. With Mortal Kombat 1, you said Street Fighter 6 with an amazing debut and a great Evo showing. Just Tekken coming out after that. Like there's a lot of competition, but at the same time, like maybe people will be just playing all of them.
And Riot is a known powerhouse to be able to develop great characters. They have an amazing process to do character creation that you care across all of their games. And so I can just see that fitting in perfectly with the fighting genre.
I guess we'll see. I think, like I said, probably an easy bet. I think we're probably all bullish on it, like unless someone says otherwise. So we'll definitely be looking forward to it in the future. Of course, everyone always keeping their eyes on Riot. Hopefully they don't become like another Blizzard. We'll see. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I know it's been like a little bit of a long one. We had, I think, a pretty meaty discussion on social casino that I imagine will continue as long as this genre lives. You can bet on that.
Those don't happen very often, so I'm thankful that you guys listen to my analysis over there.
Definitely,
a lot of people tune out very quickly on that.
But I mean, hey, if you guys enjoy that sort of conversation as well, or more topics that you'd like to see on those sorts of things, or ones you want us to like do some good extended session on, make sure to shoot us email to the mailbag, that podcast@navik.co. We always look forward to getting like emails from you guys, feedback, topics, comments, questions. We've definitely had some good questions that were good follow-ups that we've had a chance to answer. So make sure to shoot those our way. But I want to thank everyone for listening this long, as well as, of course, the panelists for sticking around for some good long conversation. And we'll see you guys next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@navik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Navik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.navik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Navik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.navik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.